It was a cold December evening when everything changed. Her name was Emma Blomfield, and we had been married for 11 years. I had built my life with her, starting from scratch. We had moved from a small, cramped apartment during our college days to a spacious house in the suburbs where we raised our two boys, Elton and Mason. I thought I knew her better than anyone, but I was wrong. The truth was, I didn't know her at all. I first began to suspect something was wrong about 6 months ago. At first, it was just little things. Her phone always face down, mysterious text messages late at night, and that look in her eyes, a kind of distance I couldn't place. When I asked her about it, she'd always laugh it off. "Oh, just work stress," she'd say, brushing her blonde hair behind her ear the way she did whenever she was lying. One evening, she stayed late at work, and I took a look at our shared phone account. I didn't even need her password, just the logs. That's when I saw it, repeated calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was a colleague or a client. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I called the number from a burner phone I kept for emergencies. A man answered, his voice sharp and irritated. "Hello?" he said. I didn't respond. I hung up immediately, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Over the next few weeks, I began putting everything together. She wasn't just seeing someone else. She was living a secret life. The late nights, the weekend conferences, the unexplained absences, it all clicked. She was spending her time with him. His name was Ansel. From what I could gather, he was a divorced father of two who lived a few towns away. He was handsome in that typical, generic, Instagram-obsessed way. He wasn't better than me, not in any real sense, but he was new, and sometimes that's all it takes. That afternoon, I packed up the boys and left. I had packed our bags the night before, quietly taking what we needed while Emma was out. I didn't tell her we were leaving, nor that we knew the truth. Instead, I dropped the kids off at my sister's place and checked into a motel across town. It wasn't glamorous, but it would do for now. I needed time to think and figure out my next move. This wasn't going to be one of those stories where the husband is left heartbroken and foolish, while the wife runs off into the arms of her lover. No, this was going to be different. I wasn't just going to let her tear our family apart. If she wanted to play these games, I was ready to show her what betrayal really costs. That night, when she came back to the empty house, I imagine she felt a rush of victory, glowing from her time with Ansel. She probably assumed I was upstairs, asleep, clueless as usual. But when she read the note I left her, I wonder if she felt a sinking sensation in her chest. Maybe she thought it was some kind of joke or a misunderstanding. She wouldn't understand until much later that this was just the beginning. For 11 years, I had been the perfect husband, loyal, supportive, loving. I gave her everything I had, everything I was, and in return, she gave me this. I wasn't going to yell at her. I wasn't going to beg. But before this was over, she was going to learn one thing. You don't destroy a man's life and walk away without consequences. The motel room was dim, the flickering television casting shadows across the walls. Elton and Mason were fast asleep in the bed we shared, their small bodies curled up against each other. They didn't really understand why we left or why we weren't going home, but they trusted me. That trust gave me the strength I needed. After hours of staring at the ceiling, I grabbed my laptop and set it on the desk. My hands moved like a machine, pulling up files, documents, and everything I had been quietly collecting over the last few weeks. I had tracked her every move, her phone calls, her credit card transactions, even her social media activity. It wasn't difficult. Emma had gotten careless, probably thinking I was too trusting or oblivious to notice. The breakthrough came when I installed a GPS tracker on her car. That's how I found the hotel. It was a mid-range place, not exactly sleazy, but discreet enough for her purposes. One afternoon, when Emma claimed she was just running errands, I decided to drive to the hotel. Her car was parked in the lot, right next to a silver Audi with a license plate I recognized, Ansel's. I didn't confront her then. I simply stayed in my car, watching as she and Ansel walked out of the hotel together, laughing like they were in their own little world. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years, and that stung more than I expected. But I had bigger things to focus on. By the time we left the house that morning, I had already set my plan in motion. This wasn't going to be some hasty, emotional outburst. No. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the destruction she had caused. I wanted her to regret what she did so deeply that it would haunt her. Not just with Ansel, but for the rest of her life. The first step was securing the finances. I'd always managed our accounts, so it was easy to move most of our savings into a separate account she couldn't touch. The credit cards were next. I didn't cancel them outright, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I reduced their limits just enough to make things frustrating for her. She would notice, and it would drive her mad. The second step was gathering solid evidence. I needed more than just suspicions. I needed irrefutable proof that I could use if things turned ugly, which I had no doubt they would. That's where Mike came in. Mike was an old friend of mine and a private investigator, one of the best. When I called him, his voice was cautious. "Brian, are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Once I start digging, there's no going back." "There's no going back anyway, Mike," I replied coldly. "Just get me what I need." Mike didn't waste time. Within days, he had photos, phone records, and even video footage of Emma and Ansel at a diner, sitting together in a booth, holding hands like high school sweethearts. It made my stomach twist, but I couldn't afford to look away. I needed to stay focused. The third step was the hardest, talking to the boys. I couldn't tell them everything, but I needed them to understand why we weren't going home. "Mom and I are going through some grown-up problems," I told them, keeping my tone calm and neutral. "But everything's going to be okay. We're just going to stay at Aunt Linda's for a little while." Mason, the younger one, seemed confused, but he didn't push. Elton, though, could sense there was more to the story. "Is Mom okay?" he asked, his brown eyes wide with concern. "She's fine," I lied, swallowing hard. "We're all fine." Later that evening, I called Linda to check in. She had been nothing but supportive, even offering to let us stay longer. But I wasn't ready to stay with her indefinitely. I had bigger plans in mind. "Have you told her yet?" Linda asked gently. "No," I admitted, "but she'll know soon enough." The next day, while Emma was at work, I returned to the house. I packed a few more things for the boys and left a second note in her dresser drawer. This one was short, to the point. "Actions have consequences." I didn't want her to panic just yet. I wanted her to stew in uncertainty, to wonder how much I knew and what I was capable of. Later that evening, Emma called. Her voice was bright, casual, as if nothing had changed. "Hey, Brian, just checking in. How are the boys?" "They're fine," I replied curtly. "Good, good," she said, a pause in her voice. Are you coming home soon?" "Not tonight," I said. "Take care." I could almost hear her frown through the phone. "Brian, what's going on? Did something happen?" I didn't answer. I simply hung up. I sat there in the motel room, the silence heavy around me. I thought about calling her back, confronting her with everything I knew, but I held back. It wasn't time yet. Let her wonder. Let her sit in the unease of her choices. The final step would come soon enough. But for now, I needed to stay calm, stay focused. Emma had made her decisions, and I was about to show her the price of those choices. The next morning, I sat in a diner across from Mike. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs, but it was quiet, perfect for what we needed to discuss. Mike slid an envelope across the table. "This is everything," he said quietly. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside were the things I had been preparing for, but wasn't sure I was ready to see. There was Emma, smiling and radiant, her hand resting on Ansel's chest as they stood outside a boutique hotel. There were printouts of their text messages, exchanges full of inside jokes and I love yous, and then there were the credit card statements, dinners, gifts, hotel stays, all meticulously documented. "She's bold," Mike commented, taking a sip of his coffee. I didn't respond. I just stared at the evidence in front of me, knowing this was just the beginning. The hard part would come soon. Most people try to cover their tracks better than this. "Maybe she thinks I'm too blind to notice," I said, my voice tight with frustration. Mike nodded slowly, watching me carefully. "What's your next move?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I flipped through the stack of evidence, each piece like a sharp dagger aimed straight at my chest. Finally, I spoke, my words low and controlled. "I want both of them to understand what it feels like to have everything ripped away." Mike didn't flinch. He had seen that look in my eyes before. "You've got leverage now," he said. "Use it wisely." That afternoon, I called Emma. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was bright but cautious, like she was trying to hide something. "Brian, I was just thinking about you." "Were you?" I kept my tone even, not letting her see how much this was cutting through me. "Of course," she replied, a hesitation creeping into her voice. "How are the boys?" "They're fine. They miss home, though." "Miss you," she said softly, her voice thick with guilt. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an easy response. "Do you love him?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the tension building, the silence hanging between us like a thick fog. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice defensive. "You heard me," I said sharply. "Do you love him?" Her voice faltered. I don't know what you're..." Don't lie to me, Emma. I cut her off. I know about Ansel. I know everything. Silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. Brian, I didn't mean for it to happen. I almost laughed. Didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated. You didn't mean to sneak off to hotels? You didn't mean to drain our account for your little fling? Which part didn't you mean, Emma? She started crying then. Real tears? Crocodile tears? I couldn't tell. Please, Brian, just let me explain. I don't need your explanations, I said coldly. What I need is for you to come home tonight. We're going to have a little talk, and you're bringing Ansel with you. What? She gasped. No, I can't. You can and you will, I interrupted. The line went dead. I didn't know if she hung up out of anger or fear, but I didn't care. I had planted the seed. Now, all I had to do was wait. That evening, I returned to the house for the first time since we left. It felt strange walking through the door, knowing what I knew. The house looked the same, but it wasn't home anymore. Not really. Emma arrived about an hour later. Her face was pale, drawn, like she had aged a decade in a single day. She stepped inside cautiously, almost like a thief returning to the scene of the crime. Ansel wasn't with her. Where is he? I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. He refused to come, she whispered. He doesn't want to get involved. Smart man, I said, leaning back against the counter. Smarter than you, at least. She flinched. Tears welled up in her eyes once again. Brian, she started, her voice quivering. No, I snapped. You don't get to play the victim here. Not after what you've done. Her shoulders sagged, and for a brief moment she looked like a broken woman. I made a mistake, she whispered. A terrible mistake. More than one, I said, tossing the envelope of evidence onto the table between us. Take a good look, Emma. That's what your mistake looks like. She hesitated, her hands shaking as she opened the envelope. As she flipped through the photos and documents, her tears turned into full-blown sobs. Brian, please, she begged. Stop, I said coldly. I don't want your apologies. I want answers. She looked up at me, mascara smudged down her cheeks, her face twisted in regret. I don't know what to say. Start with why, I said, folding my arms across my chest. Why wasn't I enough? Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she whispered, It wasn't about you. It was never about you. I felt lost. Lost? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. Well, you're about to be found, Emma, by everyone. Your parents, your friends, our neighbors. Do you think they'll see you the way Ansel does? Or will they see you for what you really are? She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. But I didn't feel any pity. I didn't feel anything. This was just the beginning, and Emma had no idea how far I was willing to go. Emma sat at the kitchen table, cradling her head in her hands. The evidence of her betrayal was spread out before her like a crime scene. I stood across from her, arms folded, my anger simmering beneath the surface. She had no idea what was coming next, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Brian, please, she begged, her voice trembling. I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want. I stared at her, my jaw tight. What I want, Emma, is for you to feel what I felt, to know what it's like to lose everything you care about. Her face crumpled, but I wasn't moved. This was a woman who had destroyed our family for her own selfish desires. She didn't deserve my sympathy, not anymore. I picked up my phone and opened the folder where I had stored all the evidence Mike had collected. The photos, the text messages, the receipts, it was all there, neatly cataloged and ready for use. I scrolled to a particularly damning photo of Emma and Ansel outside the hotel, their arms wrapped around each other. I turned the phone screen toward her, letting her see the evidence clearly. This, I said coldly, is going to your parents first, then to Ansel's ex-wife. After that, every mutual friend we have will know exactly what you've done. By the time I'm finished, you'll be the talk of this town, Emma. Her face turned pale. No, she cried, her voice breaking. She reached across the table, as if to grab the phone from my hand. Please, Brian, don't do that. The boys, they'll find out. I pulled the phone back, glaring at her. You should have thought about the boys before you decided to destroy this family. She slumped back in her chair, her sobs filling the room. For a moment, I allowed her to cry, letting the sound echo in the hollow space that used to feel like home. Then I spoke again, my tone sharp and unwavering. You're going to tell Ansel it's over, I said. You're going to block his number, delete every trace of him from your life, and pray that I don't decide to ruin his career the same way I'm going to ruin yours. Emma nodded, her tears falling freely now. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. And you're going to give me full custody of the boys, I added, my words deliberate. No arguments, no court battles. You'll sign the papers when they're ready. Her head snapped up. Panic flashed across her face. Brian, you can't. I can, and I will, I interrupted. You don't deserve them, Emma. Not after this. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words failed her. She was defeated, and she knew it. There was nothing left for her to say. I left her there, broken and sobbing, and walked upstairs to the boys' rooms. Their toys were still scattered across the floor, their beds unmade. It was a reminder of the life we'd built together, a life Emma had destroyed. I sat on Elton's bed, my head in my hands, and let the weight of it all wash over me. This wasn't the life I wanted. I never imagined I'd be the kind of man who had to tear someone down to feel whole again. But Emma had left me no choice. She'd made her move, and now it was mine. The next morning, I sent the email to Ansel's ex-wife, Lisa. I thought you'd like to know who your children are spending time with. If you need more information, let me know. Lisa was furious and demanded every detail I had. I gave her enough to keep her angry, but not enough to satisfy her completely. I wanted her to dig deeper. The more people Emma and Ansel had coming after them, the better. Emma, meanwhile, was a wreck. She stayed locked in our bedroom, emerging only once to beg me to stop. I didn't respond. I simply handed her my lawyer's card and told her to be ready to sign the custody agreement by the end of the week. That night, as I lay in the motel bed with Elton and Mason sleeping beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was in control. I wasn't going to let Emma or anyone else take that away from me again. This was just the beginning. Ansel's ex-wife, Lisa, had apparently taken my evidence straight to her lawyer and was now threatening to file for full custody of their children. One evening, while the boys slept soundly in the motel, I sat down at my laptop and reviewed everything I had on Ansel. Mike had done his job well. Ansel wasn't just some guy who'd caught Emma's attention. He was a man with vulnerabilities, ones I could use to my advantage. There were credit card records showing lavish dinners and expensive gifts he couldn't afford on his modest fitness trainer salary. A deeper dive into public records revealed he was behind on child support payments and had multiple unpaid debts. But the real goldmine came from social media. Lisa, Ansel's ex-wife, had been vocal about his failures as a father, accusing him of prioritizing his personal life over his kids. She hadn't tagged him directly, but anyone who knew the situation could easily connect the dots. I wasn't just going to sit back and let this play out. I decided to pay Ansel a visit. He worked at a gym about 20 minutes from the motel, a sleek facility catering to wealthy suburbanites. When I walked through the door, the sharp smell of sweat and disinfectant hit me immediately, but I didn't flinch. I scanned the room, searching for him, and spotted him almost immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a forced smile on his face as he guided a client through bicep curls. I waited until his session ended, then approached him at the reception desk. Ansel, I said, my voice flat. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly. You know who I am, I said, offering no emotion. We need to talk. He glanced around nervously, as if hoping someone would intervene, but when no one did, he nodded toward a small break room at the back. I followed him inside, closing the door behind us. Look, man, I don't want any trouble, Ansel began, raising his hands in defense. Whatever you think is going on. Whatever I think, I interrupted, my voice rising. I know exactly what's going on. You've been sleeping with my wife, Ansel. That's not something you can talk your way out of. He froze, his face turning pale. I didn't mean for it to... Don't, I snapped, cutting him off. Don't give me the I didn't mean for it to happen excuse. You knew exactly what you were doing. He swallowed hard, the bravado he'd been hiding behind completely gone. Look, it's over, okay? She told me it's done. I stepped closer, towering over him. You think that makes it better? You think you can just walk away from this without consequences? His eyes darted to the door, but I blocked his path. I've already sent everything to Lisa, I continued, my voice low and dangerous. She knows about the money, the neglect, all of it. You're about to lose your kids, Ansel, I said. And your job? That's next. What? He stammered, panic creeping into his voice. You can't. Oh, I can, I said, smirking. I've got enough dirt on you to make sure this gym won't want anything to do with you. I leaned in, voice cold. One call to the owner, and your career is over. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Please, he muttered, desperation creeping into his tone. Don't do this. You should have thought about that before you got involved with my wife, I said coldly. Now, here's what's going to happen. I leaned in, staring down at him. You're going to stay away from Emma. No texts, no calls, nothing. You're going to focus on your mess of a life, and you'd better pray that Lisa doesn't bury you in court. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. And if I do that, then maybe I won't destroy what little you have left, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. But don't test me, Ansel. You won't like the outcome. I left him there, slumped in the chair, and walked out of the gym without looking back. The satisfaction I felt wasn't as sweet as I had imagined, but it was enough, for now. When I returned to the motel, Emma was waiting for me in the parking lot. She looked tired, her makeup smudged, eyes red from crying. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. I crossed my arms and stared at her coldly. "What do you want, Emma?" She hesitated, her voice cracking. I need to know what happens now. What's your plan?" I laughed bitterly. My plan? My plan is to make sure you understand the cost of betrayal. To make sure you lose everything you thought you could take for granted. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "Brian, please," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." "There's no making this right," I said flatly, "but there is one thing you can do." "Anything," she said quickly. "Sign the custody agreement," I said, my voice cold. "Give me the boys, and I'll consider letting you keep some dignity." Her shoulders sagged in defeat. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll sign." I nodded, turning to head inside. Just as I reached the door, I paused. "Oh, and Emma?" I said without turning around. She looked up, her expression hollow. "Yes?" "Don't ever call me again." I didn't wait for her response. I walked inside, closing the door behind me. I walked inside, leaving Emma standing alone in the cold, the weight of her choices finally crashing down on her. The custody agreement was signed 2 days later. Emma came to my lawyer's office with a resigned expression, her hands trembling as she signed the papers. She didn't fight, didn't argue. I think she knew there was no point. She had lost the boys, our marriage, and the life we'd built together. All in a matter of weeks. Elton and Mason took the news better than I expected. They were young, resilient, and though I knew they missed their mother, they trusted me when I told them this was for the best. I didn't sugarcoat things, but I didn't share the full extent of Emma's betrayal either. That wasn't a burden they needed to carry. Emma moved out of the house the same weekend. She didn't take much, just clothes, personal items, and a few sentimental keepsakes. Watching her pack was surreal. This was the woman I had built a life with, now reduced to a shadow of the person I once loved. I didn't help her. I didn't say goodbye when she left. I just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and watched as she loaded her car. As soon as she was gone, I went to work. The house was the next piece of my revenge. Emma had tried to keep it, saying it was for the boys. But with the custody agreement settled, the house was solely mine, and I had no intention of letting her benefit from it. I sold it within a week, pocketing the profit and leaving her with nothing. The boys and I moved into a smaller, more manageable place closer to their school. It wasn't as grand, but it was ours. A fresh start, away from the ghosts of what had happened. Then there was Ansel. I kept tabs on him through Mike, my private investigator. True to form, Ansel's life was crumbling. Lisa had filed for full custody of their kids, citing neglect and financial instability. She'd even mentioned his affair with Emma in court, which didn't sit well with the judge. Ansel also lost his job at the gym. It turned out the owner wasn't thrilled about having an employee with a reputation for sleeping with married clients. Mike told me Ansel was now working odd jobs, barely scraping by. Good, he deserved every bit of it. Emma, on the other hand, had taken a job at a local boutique to make ends meet. She wasn't destitute, her parents were helping her, but she was far from the life of comfort she once enjoyed. Occasionally, I'd hear from mutual acquaintances about how she was doing. They'd say she looked tired, defeated, like she'd aged a decade in a matter of months. But I didn't feel sorry for her. This was the life she chose. But my revenge still wasn't complete. There was one final move to make. I invited Emma over one evening under the guise of letting her see the boys. She arrived promptly, looking nervous but hopeful. I let her play the doting mother for a while, watching as she hugged Elton and Mason, showering them with affection. They were happy to see her, but there was a distance between them now, a gap that hadn't been there before. After the boys went to bed, I gestured for her to sit in the living room. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Okay." I pulled out a folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. "This is everything," I said. "The photos, the texts, the financial records, everything you did with Ansel." Her face went pale. "Brian, I thought we were past this." "We're not," I interrupted. "You see, Emma, I'm not just letting you off the hook. I want you to understand the consequences of what you've done, so I've made copies of this folder." Her eyes widened. "Why would you—" "Because I need you to know," I said, leaning forward, "that if you ever try to come after me, the boys, or anything else in my life, I'll make sure everyone sees this. Your parents, your friends, your coworkers, everyone." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "I've spent weeks cleaning up the mess you made. The boys are adjusting, but they'll never forget what you did." "I'll never forget. So if you think for 1 second that you can worm your way back into our lives without my permission, think again." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "It's too late for sorry," I said coldly. "This is the life you chose, Emma. Now you get to live with it." She stayed for another hour, trying to compose herself before leaving. When she finally walked out the door, I felt a sense of closure. Not peace exactly, but something close to it. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, knowing that Emma's chapter in my life was finally closed. But in the quiet moments, I couldn't shake the question that lingered in the back of my mind. Was revenge enough to heal the wound she'd left behind? The days began to blur together as the fallout from my actions continued to spread. Emma was unraveling. Her boss, Dana, had called her into a meeting shortly after my visit. From what I heard through the grapevine, it wasn't pretty. Dana had confronted her about the financial discrepancies I'd provided and issued an ultimatum. Resign quietly or face a full investigation. Emma chose to resign. She called me that evening, her voice hollow. "Are you happy now, Brian?" she asked, the bitterness cutting through the line. "Not yet," I replied coldly, "but we're getting there." She didn't respond, only hung up. It was just as well. I didn't want to hear her excuses. Meanwhile, Ansel's life was collapsing in tandem. The gym had fired him after clients began accusing him of financial misconduct. He was drowning, and I couldn't have cared less. Let him feel the weight of his choices, just as I had. But it still wasn't enough. Not yet. I spent the next week meticulously dismantling what little remained of Emma's social standing. I made sure the photos of her and Ansel outside the hotel found their way to the parents of our son's friends, the ones she'd always tried to impress. I shared copies of her texts with Ansel, strategically sanitized to avoid explicit language, with a few key figures in her social circle. The whispers turned into open conversations, and soon Emma couldn't step into a grocery store without feeling the stares. My lawyer, Nicole, called me one afternoon. "She's petitioning for limited visitation. Supervised only." I considered this for a moment. "Let her have it. The boys deserve to see their mother, even if she doesn't deserve them." A week later, Emma showed up at my rental house. It was the first time I'd seen her in person since our confrontation. She looked thin, her once radiant complexion pale and tired. "I want to see the boys," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not here right now," I replied flatly. "But even if they were, you're not seeing them without a court-appointed supervisor." Her face twisted in frustration. "Do you really hate me that much, Brian? Do you have to destroy everything?" I leaned against the doorframe, staring her down. "This isn't about hate, Emma. This is about consequences. You thought you could cheat, lie, and steal without paying the price. Now you're learning that the world doesn't work that way." She flinched but didn't back down. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "I know that, but you've turned into someone I don't even recognize." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Maybe you never really knew me, Emma. Did you ever think of that? While you were out building your little fantasy with Ansel, I was here, holding everything together. I was protecting our family." She opened her mouth to reply, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No, Emma. You don't get to play the victim here. You made your bed. Now lie in it." She stared at me, her eyes welling with tears, then turned and walked back to her car. That night, Elton and Mason came home from soccer practice, their laughter filling the house. I sat with them at the dinner table, listening to them recount their day, and felt a small sense of peace. This was what mattered, their happiness, their safety. Emma's chaos had no place here anymore. After the boys went to bed, I sat in the quiet of the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The revenge, the calculated moves, the cold satisfaction. It had all served its purpose. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about vengeance. It was about taking control of my life again. Emma had wanted to tear everything apart, but I had rebuilt it, piece by piece. And as I looked at my sons, the only real family I had left, I knew I was finally on the path to healing. Emma and Ansel were broken, their lives in tatters. But as I sat there, I realized something. Revenge hadn't healed me. It hadn't erased the betrayal or filled the void she'd left. It had only shown me what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the photos of the boys, their smiles reminding me of why I'd done all of this. They were my reason for everything now. My focus had to shift, from punishing Emma to rebuilding the life I wanted for me and my sons. Tomorrow, I'd call Nicole to finalize the custody arrangements and set up a schedule for supervised visits. The war was over, and I'd won, but victory didn't taste as sweet as I thought it would. Life settled into a new rhythm after the dust began to clear. Elton and Mason adjusted well to our new home, the transition smoother than I had dared to hope. Kids are resilient like that, finding joy in the smallest things, a new friend at school, a makeshift goalpost in the backyard, or pizza nights on the couch. For me, though, the silence after they went to bed was deafening. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of strategy and retaliation, and now that the storm had passed, I was left with nothing but my own thoughts. The house felt too quiet, too empty, even with the boys asleep upstairs. For 11 years, Emma's presence had been as constant as my own shadow. Now that she was gone, I couldn't decide if I felt liberated or hollow. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey, staring at the custody agreement Nicole had delivered. It was ironclad. Emma wouldn't dare challenge it, not with the weight of her actions looming over her. But the boys deserved better than a fractured family. As much as I hated what Emma had done, she was still their mother, and that bond couldn't be erased. The next day, I called Nicole. I want to set up the supervised visits, I told her. Make sure the boys have time with Emma. There was a long pause before she answered. Are you sure, Brian? After everything she's done, I wouldn't blame you for wanting to keep her out of their lives. I'm sure, I said, my voice steady. This isn't about her, it's about them. Emma's visits began the following week. A court-appointed supervisor accompanied her to a community center where she could spend a few hours with Elton and Mason. I didn't go with them, choosing instead to wait in the parking lot with a book I couldn't focus on. When they came back to the car, Elton's face was flushed with excitement, while Mason clutched a drawing Emma had helped him make. She made my favorite cookies, Mason said, holding up a small container. You can have one, Dad. I smiled and took one, though the taste of oatmeal raisin now carried an unexpected bitterness. How was it? I asked Elton as we drove home. Good, he said simply. Then after a moment, she seemed sad. She's going through a tough time, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Because of you? He asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. The question caught me off guard, but I didn't flinch. No, I said, because of the choices she made. He nodded, seeming to accept the answer, but his words stayed with me long after we got home. One evening, Linda stopped by for dinner. She'd been my rock through all of this, taking the boys when I needed time to think, offering advice when I felt lost. Now she sat across from me in the kitchen, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. How are you holding up? She asked, sipping her wine. I'm fine, I said, though the weight of my words felt heavier than they should. The boys are good. That's what matters. And Emma? She pressed. I shrugged. She's doing what she's supposed to. The visits seem to help the kids. So that's something, Linda leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. And you? When do you stop focusing on her and start focusing on yourself? I frowned, caught off guard. What do you mean? You've spent so much time dealing with her betrayal, with the custody battle, with revenge, she said. But Brian, that's done now. You won. What are you going to do for yourself? Her words hit harder than I expected. For weeks, my life had revolved around dismantling Emma's. Now that it was over, I didn't know what came next. I'd buried myself in work and the boys' activities. But I hadn't stopped to consider what I needed. Honestly, I said after a moment, I don't know. Months passed, and with them came a sense of stability I hadn't felt in a long time. The boys were thriving. Elton made the school's soccer team, and Mason won a regional art competition for a painting he proudly hung in the living room. The smiles on their faces reminded me daily why I had fought so hard to protect them from the chaos Emma had unleashed. As for Emma, her supervised visits had become a regular part of our lives. She was trying, really trying, to rebuild her relationship with the boys. I could see it in the way she listened intently to their stories, in the effort she put into their activities during the visits. I didn't trust her, not fully, but I could acknowledge that she was taking steps in the right direction. A few weeks later, I got an email from Emma. She asked if we could meet, just the two of us. I hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. If we were going to co-parent effectively, we needed to find some common ground. We met at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town. She looked better than she had in months, healthier, more composed. As I sat across from her, I noticed the nervous way she clutched her coffee cup. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice cautious. "What's on your mind?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to say thank you for letting me see the boys, for giving me a chance to fix things with them." I nodded. They deserve to have their mom in their lives. She looked down at her coffee, her expression somber. "I know I can't undo what I did. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I realize now how much I hurt you and them. If I could take it back." "But you can't," I interrupted gently. "And that's okay. What matters is what you do now." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw genuine remorse. "I just want to do right by them and by you if I can." "I appreciate that," I said. "But this isn't about us, Emma. It's about the boys. As long as you're putting them first, we'll be fine." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I am, I promise." As we parted ways, I felt lighter somehow. The anger I'd carried for so long had dulled to a quiet ache, but it no longer controlled me. Closure had finally come, not from her apology, but from within myself. One evening after the boys were in bed, I sat on the couch flipping through an old photo album. It was filled with memories of the life Emma and I had shared. Birthdays, vacations, quiet moments at home. I felt a pang of sadness for what had been lost, but it was mixed with gratitude for what remained. My boys, my sense of purpose, my resilience. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Linda standing there, a bottle of wine in her hand. "Thought you could use some company," she said with a grin. I smiled, stepping aside to let her in. "You always know when to show up." As we sat together, talking and laughing, I realized that life had a way of surprising you. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine, and it was good. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. I had built something new, something stronger, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to see what the future held.